This evening's Mass of the Lord's Supper, which officially begins the sacred Triduum, commemorates for us three principal mysteries in the life of Holy Mother Church. Number one, the institution of the Most Holy Eucharist. Number two, the institution of the New Testament priesthood. And number three, the commandment of the Lord concerning fraternal charity, that is, to love one another as he has loved us. These three mysteries, while commemorating three individual realities, are united solemnly as they all took place and were made manifest in the upper room during the Last Supper between Christ and his apostles. Illustrating this strong link between these three mysteries, ideally the only Mass celebrated in parish churches on this day is this evening Mass of the Lord's Supper, unless a genuine pastoral reason necessitates otherwise. Let us now take a look briefly at each of these three mysteries. The institution of the Holy Eucharist. This Holy Thursday evening Mass of the Lord's Supper is foremost the memorial of the very institution of the Most Holy Eucharist, of the memorial of the Lord's Passover, by which, under sacramental signs, he perpetuated among us the sacrifice of the new law. Devotionally, this memorial is now commemorated as the fifth luminous mystery of the Most Holy Rosary, the institution of the Most Holy Eucharist. And in the second reading from St. Paul, in his first letter to the members of the church at Corinth, he passes on faithfully this truth to us, quite vividly, in fact. And in the first reading, too, from the book of Exodus, we learn of that first Passover, which brought the Israelites out of their slavery from Egypt. This same reading also prophesies to all future generations the new and eternal Paschal Lamb, Jesus Christ, by whose life, death, and resurrection we are all freed from the slavery and corruption of sin. And we know that the Mass perpetuates or represents, make sure you have the hyphen in there as opposed to the word represents. The Mass represents that one sacrificial offering in that historical moment of time on that first Good Friday. And the Mass represents it or perpetuates it until the second coming. The second mystery is the institution of the New Testament priesthood, commemorated during this evening Mass of the Lord's Supper. Bound intimately to the Most Holy Eucharist itself, this evening's Mass of the Lord's Supper is also the memorial of the New Testament priesthood. This is why it's so important that this Mass be concelebrated. Until the reform and renewal of the liturgical texts of the Roman Rite mandated by the Second Vatican Council, a Mass of priestly ordination was one of the very few occasions whereby priests could concelebrate the sacred mysteries of the Eucharist as a sign of their unity in the priestly service to God's people. Since Vatican II, however, this unity is expressed especially at the annual Chrism Mass, held ideally on the morning of Holy Thursday, but not strictly required to be held then. This Mass is usually held in the diocesan cathedral, unless a pastoral necessity requires that it be moved to another place, say, for example, because of crowd size. And it is concelebrated by the bishop with all of his priests, what's called his presbyterate, as this again serves as a sign of their unity in the priestly service of God's people. And the unity of the priesthood is further exemplified at the Chrism Mass, which foreshadows tonight's evening Mass of the Lord's Supper. And in that, after the liturgy of the Word has been celebrated, the priests renew their ordination commitment, and the parishes receive their holy oils at the Chrism Mass, with representatives coming up to receive those oils at the end of the Mass. And here we are again gathered, priests and people, priests who serve the people of God with those oils, with the sacraments. And so we see the beautiful continuity here between these liturgies, and we can even see why ideally the Chrism Mass is held on the morning of Holy Thursday, if possible. And thirdly, the commandment of the Lord concerning fraternal charity, the third mystery commemorated in this evening Mass. This evening Mass of the Lord's Supper is also the memorial of that love by which the Lord loved us even until death, and which he commands each one of us to love one another. This last dimension is made manifest to all of us in a most dramatic way by the optional foot washing ceremony which follows after this liturgy of the Word, but before the liturgy of the Eucharist begins. This action is dramatic in that it symbolizes a most humble deed. That is, the washing of what were regularly sandaled feet in first century Palestine was a duty reserved for slaves to carry out on their masters. And in tonight's Gospel from St. John, however, we learn that it is this same action that Christ himself chooses to illustrate the novum mandatum, Latin for the new mandate or the new commandment of his apostles to love one another and all that they serve. From the apostles themselves, this new commandment to love one another extends to all those whom the apostles will serve in the church through their successors till the end of time, the general judgment. A side note here is that the word mandatum in Latin, again for mandate or commandment, from which the old French derivative mande or mandi is obtained, is the very reason why Holy Thursday is sometimes referred to as Maundy Thursday, because of the mandatum, the new commandment to love. Maundy Thursday. At the instruction of Pope Francis, the rite of the washing of feet on Holy Thursday has now been modified to lawfully permit a wider representation of the entire people of God, quote unquote, to take part in this ceremony, which again is optional. For example, a broader representation of women and children, marrieds and singles, and consecrated religious men and women. The Holy Father's decision in this regard has been made effective by a decree of the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments, dated this past January 6th of 2016. In that decree, Pope Francis explains that the primary reason for his decision is to better reflect, quote, the significance of the gesture Jesus performed in the upper room, giving himself to the very end for the salvation of the whole world and of his boundless charity to all, end quote. The decision to choose only men for the foot washing ceremony may still be retained if the celebrant so wishes. Two beautiful things that Pope Francis and Pope Benedict before him have said about this foot washing ceremony, and it's this. We see the greatness of God precisely in that he stoops down. We see the greatness of Almighty God precisely because that same great Almighty God stoops down to us. And the other thing both Pope Francis has said, as well as Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, is that that Jesus washing the apostles' feet is very symbolic of Jesus washing each one of us throughout our lives whenever he forgives us of sin. Jesus' washing of the apostles' feet is also symbolic of he himself, Jesus, washing each one of us personally throughout our lives whenever we sin. He stoops down to meet us where we're at. So it is then, my friends, at the unfolding of these three great mysteries during this evening's Mass of the Lord's Supper mark the beginning of the Church's celebration of the Paschal Triduum, the period of 3 days which begins with this evening Mass of the Lord's Supper, reaches its high point in the Easter Vigil, and closes officially with evening prayer or Vespers on Easter Sunday evening. Just as Sunday is the preeminent day of the week, so can we say that the Paschal Triduum is the celebration par excellence of the entire liturgical year. For each one of us personally, then, my friends, may these 3 days recall Christ's institution of the sacraments of the Most Holy Eucharist, of holy orders, that is, the New Testament priesthood, his commandment to each one of us concerning fraternal charity, and of course, his passion and death and his triumphant resurrection from the dead. God bless you, and a very blessed Triduum to all of you.